Politics in Michigan wasn't working for people for different reasons, but they all kind of had the same root problem, which is that our politicians in Michigan weren't listening to voters. And why they weren't listening was because they didn't have to. Politicians, because of gerrymandering, they got to draw their own districts and they got to choose their own voters as opposed to the other way around.
In 2018, through Proposal 2, Michigan voters took fate in their own hands, and by more than 61%, they decided to have citizens, everyday citizens, to draw the maps versus politicians. So that acronym FATE kind of set the foundation in terms of fairness, awareness, transparency, and engagement.
Tomorrow, the Michigan Redistricting Commission will start the process of voting on new congressional districts. There's been a controversy with the current proposals, with some Detroit leaders claiming the new maps will not represent them.
Detroiters should be represented by Detroiters, just like any other community.
Utilizing the general election is the wrong data to use.
I think the media struggled with covering this because it's very complicated. The reporters would say that to me and to others that, how can I boil this down and get it into a 30-second clip?
Well, when we look at the Constitution, communities of interest is defined as the third rank criteria in the redistricting process, and it actually says reflect the state's diversity and communities of interest. And it also said that communities of interest did not represent a political party. So the commission was very clear about not looking at municipal boundaries, township boundaries as communities of interest.
The difficulty of communities of interest is that they are classifications that fall outside census classifications. The concept is a little bit slippery because it involves identifying a community of people who are geographically cohesive, so they live close enough together to make an impact on an election. And they share some interest, whether it be an industry interest or a language interest or some cultural interest that makes them feel that they have a stake in legislation that affects them. So one thing that you might want to watch out for is to make sure that they are not used on some pretextual basis to justify a map that some map drawer wants to draw just to suit them for other purposes.
Many other states use the concept of communities of interest in their own approaches to redistricting. We identified over 1,200 community groups of all kinds.
The state Supreme Court will not grant a deadline extension to the commission in charge of drawing new legislative and congressional maps in our state. The Redistricting Commission wants the deadline bumped back to January 25th, but the court says that there isn't a sufficient legal reason for it to extend the deadline.
The pandemic absolutely affected the process and our ability to draw maps. The census data was delayed. There were also questions about the accuracy and the reliability of the census data because of the pandemic. I mean, was the census a complete count? Was a question that sort of plagued us throughout the process.
One of the problems to start with is we were meeting by Zoom because of the pandemic. It's hard to to build that camaraderie over a Zoom meeting. So once we went into in-person meetings, then we developed good camaraderie.
Meeting in person was definitely a key part of the bonding, the teamwork. We got to build relationships of trust. And then when we were working together and it was really long days and it was stressful, we were getting pressure from all sides, we could trust the process that we were all going through together and know that we all had the same goal of creating good, fair maps.
It was like our coming of age process, right? We actually, during that first round of public hearings, before we did any maps, got to know each other, got to hear the public, and also hear each other and how we were processing what we were hearing from the public. The mapping part, which happened after that first round of public hearings, was influenced a great deal because of that. For our process, for what we did, I'm really proud of it.
One of the really terrific things that this commission did was adapt to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The commission, I think, did a good job of providing a range of outreach to try to inform citizens about their opportunities to engage. And I think that paid off. We saw it with the turnout at public meetings, public hearings, and so on.
They, made a public portal available. They held Zoom webinars as well as in-person meetings. And they really invited everyone in, and kind of everyone got to see what a complicated process redistricting is.
We received 30,000 public comments. I read every single one of them. I listened to every single one of them. But for me to say as an individual, like that I can accurately categorize or put them on a shelf where they go, I mean, that's just not realistic for any person. And so while I did my best, and I know others did as well, we really could have helped ourselves by having a tracking system for those comments.
I think we had more participation from the city areas and the more urban, suburban areas than we had from the rural areas. I think there was skepticism in general from organizations in the rural areas. And we did have participation in powerful ways with a solid kind of message that it was hard to not hear.
It was all open. There weren't any secret meetings other than the one, which, as they say, the defecation hit the ventilation on that.
Leaders with Michigan's Redistricting Commission are defending their decision to go into a closed session this afternoon, preventing the public from hearing the members discuss 2 legal memos.
The commission, which has made a point of being transparent throughout the process of drawing up their map proposals, voted 11-2 to temporarily go into that closed session, triggering backlash from Republicans and Democrats alike.
Commission officials say the accusations are being overblown, saying the closed session was only to discuss things that had attorney-client privilege.
I mean, the mission is still the same. The deadlines haven't changed, and we are committed to drawing fair maps with public engagement.
I know that there are people that are skeptical that we weren't transparent, or maybe we were making closed-door deals or something, but I just wish everyone could see that we were totally transparent. We did not discuss anything if it wasn't in an open meeting.
Michigan's Independent Redistricting Commission is being hit with a lawsuit. A group of state lawmakers made the announcement today. The suit alleges the commission is in violation of the Voter Rights Act.
The commission purported that there would be an opportunity for African American leadership, and that it wouldn't change because even though these districts were not majority African American, that if the best candidate was African American and had showed promise, good political capital, demonstrated themselves, that they would prevail. Our primary election 2022 shows us that that didn't happen.
The training regimen was disjointed in my mind because nobody knew what they were doing. Probably nobody knew about the Voting Rights Act.
There are lots of things that this inaugural commission has learned. It could communicate proactively, more proactively with the public. It could explain, for example, this is what the Voting Rights Act means. This is what the analysis requires.
I think the commission definitely experienced some tension in terms of advice we were receiving from council.
I would definitely make sure that we have more staff, numbers of people, to do the numbers of hours that were required. That could be a way to increase transparency because, right, there may be minutes or transcripts that could be uploaded quicker.
There was not enough data about minority candidates and election outcomes in primaries over the last decade. This is really important data for the next commission to be able to understand how their maps protect minority voter rights according to the Voting Rights Act. I think we have to say, would a different approach have produced better maps? Not necessarily.
I would say that Michigan did actually quite well, and it's a really promising sign that the very first time out of the gate, Michigan drew pretty fair maps, both congressional and legislative.
This kind of set of circumstances that we're faced with in 2020 and 2021, I think this commission really did its job and did it well. They did the job of drawing fair and impartial districts within a transparent process. And they are actually some of the fairest in the country
I would absolutely disagree with that in terms of southeastern Michigan and how the lines have been drawn for communities that African Americans reside in. We believed that this was going to be an opportunity to have some fair maps, but now we have a situation where there is not likely to be Black representation from Michigan in Congress.
One thing I would recommend that the future commission do is start hiring staff immediately. We were months before we had staff, and luckily the Secretary of State's office provided staff for us, support staff, and they were wonderful and they really, really helped. But it was different than having our own staff, and I really think that needs to happen from the get-go.
I would probably have a budget analyst or a financial analyst to track the money, going in, coming out, doing the bidding, the procurement process. The Michigan Department of State Procurement Department was phenomenal.
One of the suggestions early on from some of the commissioners and from other commissions in other states, particularly Arizona, was that we staff 2 attorneys, and we elected not to do that. And in hindsight, I think that was a mistake. I think we should have had either 2 neutral attorneys or maybe a Republican and a Democratic attorney. I think we should have had 2 voices in our general counsel office.
For a commission like the Independent Redistricting Commission in Michigan to do its work, it's going to need at least enough money to have good legal counsel, good data counsel, and enough money to have public meetings across the state. And of course, enough money to pay the commissioners who are dropping their everyday lives in order to be redistricting commissioners.
The only thing I would change about the selection process for the commission is perhaps more public education. There are people, I think, who were thinking that there should be a certain number of either racial groups or geographic distribution on the commission. But I think overall what we ended up with is exactly what you would hope to have in a citizen-run redistricting commission, which is that it was run by everyday Michiganders who could relate to all the people that came before them.
If I had a chance to talk to a future commissioner, I would say to spend the time working to learn what you have to do, and then have confidence in your own decision making. And the commissioners need to have the strength to say, okay, we're making this decision, here's why we're making it, and here's what we're going to do, and then stand behind that.
There's no magic formula. All you have to do is listen to community members all across the state who are going to come and talk with you, and their goal is just going to be to educate you. This is why it should be considered a community of people that want our interests represented in government. All you have to do is listen and gain all of that education, and this redistricting process is something that we will all do together.
It may be the hardest thing that you'll do. There'll be pressure from all sides, but it's important and really fulfilling to take part and just do so honestly and with no agenda except for creating the best maps that you can create and working as a team. And it's great to see government by the people for the people.